There is nothing more necessary than good intelligence to frustrate a designing enemy, and nothing requires greater pains to obtain.
Since our nation's earliest days, military intelligence has made vital contributions to our security during peace and war. Over the last 50 years, America has called upon the Defense Intelligence Agency to integrate military intelligence collection, analysis, and resources. From the tense and uncertain days of the Cuban Missile Crisis to the violent extremism that threatens our world today, DIA's intelligence professionals have continuously shown themselves responsive, adaptive, and committed to excellence in defense of the nation. 50 years in the making. DIA, celebrating our legacy, forging our future.
We're about to celebrate DIA's 50th anniversary when President Kennedy and then Secretary of Defense McNamara created DIA in 1961.
DIA was really a brainchild of McNamara. He felt that there was a need to integrate things.
He was getting different answers from the services, and so he was looking for one organization that could give him the consolidated view of the various intelligence organizations.
DIA is created to analyze, produce, and disseminate military intelligence throughout the Department of Defense to support national security policymakers and military commanders. But DIA encounters early challenges.
You know, we were the new kid on the block, and we just, I don't think, got that much respect.
When I moved to Arlington Hall, it was a couple of old, what were they, Margie?
They were old temporary buildings from World War II. We had A building and B building.
They were so old and so bad that the safes had to be lined up along the wall because the building bowed in the middle, and if you put heavy safes full of classified documents, they probably would have ended up in the basement.
Within 1 year of the agency's creation, it faces a grave test in support of a president confronting an audacious challenge from the Soviet Union.
The photo interpreter came out and said to us, "Come and see what I found." He had found missiles in Cuba.
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
As one of our employees, actually, John Hughes, that briefed President Kennedy on that subject. And actually, I remember seeing John on nationwide TV briefing us on exactly what the Russians were doing with respect to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Establish clandestinely a major offensive weapons base in the Western Hemisphere.
As the agency matures, it is given additional critical responsibilities. In 1965, the Defense Attaché System is established within DIA. Stationed worldwide, attachés advise ambassadors and observe and report foreign military intentions and capabilities. Former ambassador to the United Nations and Germany, Vernon Walters, distinguishes himself as the attaché extraordinaire. He speaks 7 languages and serves tours of duty as U.S. Defense Attaché to Brazil, Italy, and France.
Attachés have been central figures because of their expertise and because of the fact that they are eyes and ears on the ground and can report in a real-time fashion.
The United States faces many domestic and foreign challenges during the 1960s, but one grows to define the decade. It becomes the focus of the nation's military and political leadership and central to DIA's mission. The war in Vietnam.
Although military targets in North Vietnam are heavily hit, the fighting in South Vietnam continues.
Took us back into a room there. I didn't know at the time, but that was the JCS area, Joint Chiefs of Staff area. And this crusty old Colonel, God, he must have had medals from here to here, came up and he says, "What you hear here stays here. You're not even to tell your boss." And so, of course, we sat upright a little bit to find out. And he said to us, he said, "The president has decided to bomb North Vietnam, and you are to select the targets."
DIA demonstrates a growing ability to integrate all source intelligence, not only in Washington, but also forward in support of troops and commanders in the field.
The Defense Intelligence Agency became a combat intelligence agency supporting the Vietnam War.
It was an unclassified document that outlined for the American people and for people abroad just what the nature of the Soviet threat was.
Following the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam and a drawdown in intelligence resources and capabilities, the 1970s present a wide range of new challenges. Perhaps DIA's most important mission during this period is evaluating the Soviet Union's strategic and conventional capabilities. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in late 1979, and Cold War tensions intensify between Moscow and Washington. These tensions define the 1980s.
They are the focus of evil in the modern world.
Ronald Reagan modernizes the U.S. military.
Reagan's objective was to outspend the Soviets, if you will, and certainly there were a lot of plus-ups in terms of monies that were dedicated toward Soviet analysis.
For DIA, it is a time to prove its military intelligence expertise and expand. Congress funds a headquarters for DIA to consolidate an agency scattered across many Washington locations. DIA moves into the Defense Intelligence Analysis Center in April of 1984. But the heart of DIA is not the new headquarters. It is the new technologies and the people located inside.
DIA from 1981 through 1989 produced a document called Soviet Military Power. It was an unclassified document that outlined for the American people and for people abroad just what the nature of the Soviet threat was.
But Moscow is far from the only threat during the 1980s. There are increasing concerns in Asia and in our own hemisphere.
You also had the situation in Central America with Nicaragua and the fight against the Sandinistas in El Salvador and the stand of the Cajun, which was, I think, one of the early experiments in trying to be able to fuse all of the intelligence.
The decade also sees the dramatic evolution of another growing threat, an asymmetric challenge to U.S. military capabilities. 1985 becomes known as the year of the terrorist.
It was like we were at war. Hijackings, hostages, hostage and barricades, bombings, assassinations. There was something going on all the time.
DIA as a whole began to develop and put resources against having people who were dedicated to following the terrorist problem.
The Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986 reorganizes the United States military, strengthening the roles of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the combatant commanders. DIA is designated a combat support agency, responsible for critical intelligence support to the combatant commands.
The job of supporting the chairman on behalf of the director of DIA became a much more important task.
In 1986, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger presents DIA with a Joint Meritorious Unit Award for outstanding intelligence support in a series of crises. This is the first in a string of awards earned by the agency and its subordinate organizations. In 1989, Operation Just Cause in Panama demonstrates the benefits of another form of cooperation, this time between DIA and operational force planners.
The invasion of Panama was a real bellwether for all of us because it was the largest military operation conducted by the U.S. government since the Vietnam War. And that's where emerged General Powell's doctrine about the use of overwhelming force to overcome any objective.
But few events are as significant to the national intelligence community and the international balance of power as the fall of the Berlin Wall and its aftermath.
Astonishing news from East Germany, where the East German authorities have said, in essence, that the Berlin Wall doesn't mean anything anymore.
Well, I've often said, only half facetiously that, we lost the enemy, we grew to know and love the Soviet Union, which, of course, yes, it was a huge adversary, large military, but it was predictable, stereotypical, and from an intelligence perspective, in comparison, actually quite manageable. Literally hundreds and hundreds of employees that supported the entire panoply of intelligence needs for Desert Storm.
We really didn't know what was going to happen after the Cold War. We didn't have an enemy.
In the complex environment that follows the Soviet collapse, the intelligence community and DIA face significant cuts in personnel and capabilities.
Many in Congress and elsewhere were saying that we needed to reduce the size of the Department of Defense and intelligence itself because the threat was much less.
But peace quickly turns to war.
During Desert Storm, where essentially the entire agency turned to support the war effort, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of employees that supported the entire panoply of intelligence needs for Desert Storm.
The agency exceeds expectations in support of an air campaign and 100-hour ground war. Both are without precedent for speed, accuracy, and superiority. Enabled by new levels of intelligence provided by DIA and others, the campaign achieves its goals, fortunately with few coalition casualties.
DIA really stepped up during Desert Shield and Desert Storm in a way that was significantly different from some of the crises that we've gone through in the past.
The intelligence that DIA was producing was critical. DIA was the focus for all the information on the Scud attacks, on the air, Navy, and ground activity by Iraq.
Starting with Desert Storm and throughout the 90s, it was really DIA that began to come to the forefront in supporting those operating forces.
We had engagements in Haiti, engagements in Bosnia, engagements in Kosovo, all through the 90s.
As the 1990s draw to a close, terrorist attacks against our embassies in Africa warn of a rising violent extremism. On September 11, 2001, terrorist strikes in New York City and at the Pentagon are felt around the world.
I was in a meeting in the Pentagon with people in my office. My aide came in and said a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And then we were watching as a second plane hit. Of course, the hotlines and everything was ringing off the hook. The next thing I heard was the whoosh past my window, felt the shudder as a plane hit the Pentagon, and the smoke got to our office very quickly. It was obviously a traumatic time for our country. It was a very traumatic time for DIA.
After September 11th, DIA's mission expands to combat highly adaptive transnational terrorists, while also maintaining focus on more traditional threats and potential adversaries. To meet these massive challenges, DIA expands dramatically.
After 9/11, DIA really increased their size. They were able to deploy literally thousands of people in direct support of the warfighter, something that was done on a much, much smaller scale earlier.
The nation, the U.S. military, and DIA are tested as never before by the challenges presented on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. Following the invasion of Iraq, DIA leads the Iraq Survey Group's search for weapons of mass destruction. Within months, however, events on the ground shift. Signs of growing sectarian violence and an increasingly lethal insurgency threaten to consume a liberated Iraq. Early successes are quickly overtaken by new challenges posed by highly adaptive and resilient insurgents and terrorists. Expectations and demands quickly grow for intelligence support needed in counterinsurgency campaigns. In the middle of two wars, DIA also is charged with simultaneously undertaking one of the largest transformations in the history of defense intelligence. In 2006, DIA is given responsibility for the intelligence components at the U.S. combatant commands. The move redefines the agency.
The decision was made to begin to consolidate operations out in the combatant commands and bring those military positions and those civilians into DIA.
DIA's wartime transformation extends beyond the intelligence components of the combatant commands. In 2008, DIA strengthens its human and counterintelligence capabilities in response to growing demands at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels.
Another huge organizational change was the integration of the former CIFA, the Counterintelligence Field Activity, into DIA and the creation of the Defense Counterintelligence and Human Center.
We knew that we needed to further professionalize and put emphasis on human, to include interrogators and strategic debriefers along with the traditional human case officer kind of thing.
With a presence in over 137 countries, DIA is more forward deployed than at any time in its history. No matter the location of crisis or conflict around the world, over the last half-century, DIA stands watch. Collecting and analyzing foreign military intentions and capabilities in support of policymakers, military commanders, and American servicemen and women in harm's way. All over the world, DIA continues to enable successful military and intel operations.
DIA's legacy is the fact that they are who the warfighter, from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the soldier in the foxhole, turns to when they need to know what they need to know when they need to know it. That is what DIA is all about.
They really are able to give the warfighter his competitive advantage. I certainly look to them as a customer, but the ones that really need this are out there at the edge. And their ability to do that in a time frame and at a scale that is unprecedented is really what defines them as a generation of analysts that have advantaged this country in ways that we probably yet to appreciate.
It is a mission that continues in an environment growing more complex every day.
Since 2005, our agency has had operational deployments totaling around 1,500, and each year those numbers have gone up. And for the foreseeable future, we see that continuing to be the case.
Over the years, I think DIA has really come into its own. It is clearly a major component of the United States intelligence community. It has unique capabilities, unique accesses. I think the support that has been rendered in not almost 10 years of combat in Iraq and now more recently Afghanistan, the work that DIA does in the human arena has been superb.
I think the biggest challenge that we have today is focusing not only on the current threat that we have that we're facing with the focus on Afghanistan and Iraq, but also ensuring that we are postured to face the threats of the future as they are coming, because the rest of the world is not standing still while we are focused on the current fight.
Young people that have never known anything but war during their time at DIA. That's a fundamentally different demographic than historically we've had in the agency. They understand better what's going on in the battlefield because they move forward to the battlefield much more often than we used to do with intelligence analysts. They understand when it needs to be there and when it's relevant and how good it needs to be.
Never underestimate the power of this agency to cause change inside the DOD and even inside the government. We can do a lot of things just by speaking truth to power from the vantage point of knowledge this agency can develop.
The motto of this agency, to me, really says it all. Committed to excellence in defense of the nation.